Canada.
Coming to you live from the Now Media Newsroom.
Welcome, John Carpe. Thank you for joining me again. You've been on here a few times now, but you're talking about a gift we could get by Christmas. I don't know if it's a gift or not, though. Canada could become a police state by Christmas if they get to pass that Bill C-8.
But you combine that with briefly Bill C-2 is the Authorized Access to Information Act, which gives numerous government officials the right to demand subscriber information from companies like TELUS and Rogers, gives Canada Post the authority to open mail, makes it illegal to use cash in amounts greater than $10,000. So you've got C2, the Strong Borders Act, which I call the Strong Surveillance Act. If you add to that Bill C9, puts the hate speech provisions on steroids. We're going to see a lot more Canadians being prosecuted over what they wrote or what they said. So that's C9 on hate speech. And then on top of that, Bill C8, which will bring in the Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act, as well as amending the Telecommunications Act. And it will give the federal cabinet power to kick individual Canadians off the internet by way of a ministerial order without warning, without judicial review. The citizen can theoretically dispute that in court, but unless you've got 100,000 extra dollars kicking around in a bank account ready to use for litigation. And bear in mind, litigation always takes 2 or 3 years, or almost always, right? So if Bill C8 passes, then you've got the federal cabinet has the power to kick individual Canadians off the internet. So those three bills together, we're going to become a police state by Christmas by giving so much unbridled, unchecked authority to the federal government to control any Canadian company that provides internet services or phone services to Canadians.
Yeah, I did that interview with Lisa, and we talked about, like the Americans have this, like they export all their culture wars kind of to the rest of the world, but then they have that the First Amendment rights, which is freedom of speech, which is almost absolute. Whereas in Canada, we don't have that. We more have like guardrails that our Liberal government continues to kind of compress. And that's what you're saying these bills do, is we're just compressing our rights and freedoms just a little bit more, just a little bit on this edge and a little bit on this edge and a little bit on this edge. But when you start to put them all together, it's starting to sound pretty like police state, right? Like it's starting to get, it's kind of sneaky in a way, because it's just a little bit on this one, a little bit on this one, and then it just kind of like in around the edges, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
This Bill C8 gives the federal government powers to issue these orders against any company. Telecommunications, by the way, is basically anything that is not ink on paper. It includes radio, television, internet, websites, podcasts, videocasts, everything. So the government, of course, dresses this up as a need for national security and public safety, which are goals that I agree with, you probably agree with, that everybody agrees, national security, public safety, those are good goals. And so the government says we need to protect our telecommunication systems from terrorists, from hackers, from fraudsters, from foreign state actors. And again, okay, yes, we do need to protect ourselves, but we've got, in order to do that, you don't give the federal government this unfettered authority to turn off and shut down the phone accounts and internet accounts of individual Canadians. Yet that's exactly what this act does. And the ministerial order can be secret in whole or in part. So the minister can issue this, tell us or Rogers or Bell or somebody to do such and such. And then inside that order, it can say, this order is secret. You're not allowed to tell anybody about it. Okay, which is really bad for transparency. If you disobey the order, for individual Canadians, you can be fined up to $50,000 per day. And if you disobey an order for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, each day you can get an additional 50,000 raked up. For corporations, companies, businesses, it's even worse. It is up to $15 million a day in penalties for non-compliance with the ministerial order. And again, your only recourse if you get kicked off the internet is to go to court and seek a court ruling to overturn the minister's order. But to do that, you need $100,000 in the bank, and you need to wait for 2 or 3 years. If you even win, it's going to take 2 or 3 years of litigation.
My question is, how does the mechanics of this work for people that are actually these bad actors? Because like you can buy a burner phone anywhere you want, you can buy a SIM, you can do all kinds of different things. Like it's not really going to stop the bad actors, but it may curtail some honest citizens that maybe have said something that the Liberal government doesn't like.
Well, theoretically, the minister the order has to be to combat a threat, but that threat can include disruption, degradation of the internet. It doesn't say expressly that the content of what you say, or the content of your website, or the content of what you say in a podcast or video cast, that is exempt. So the minister could say that, this independent media newscast is a threat to the telecommunication system in Canada because you're advocating for some really terrible ideas. So it's a threat. So he can shut you down. Now, if the minister was on this show with us, he would say, "Oh, no, we would never use this to control and regulate speech." I say, well, then put that in the Act, because the Act only talks about threats to telecommunications security.
Yeah.
So
put the limitations in.
So the C8, if it's passed in its current form, the federal government will get the power to designate any company it wishes as somehow vital to national security. You don't get a say in whether you get designated as such. And once you're designated, the minister can also order any company to turn over information to the federal government. So this is kind of like a search without a warrant. And you add that to the Online News Act, the Online Streaming Act. We are rapidly moving towards a place in Canada where the federal government controls the internet.
I was going to say that when you were saying that they control this newscast here, because they already do it to us with the Online News Act. Bill C-18 has taken our audience away of 200,000 that we earned over a decade serving this community. They decided to take that away under the guise of helping us, but they've crushed local independent media. 100 have failed since the introduction of that bill 2 years ago. And they know, even some of the Liberal MPs, I understand half of them think that it's a bad thing, yet they continue to do it. And they said they're going to boycott Meta, and yet the Liberal government is spending with Facebook. So again, what they say and what they do are two different things. But Bill C-18 is definitely damaging to independent news outlets.
Yeah. Bill C-8, along with C-9 and C-2, those three together. A fourth bill that might be forthcoming is the reintroduction of the Online Harms Act, which prior to the last election was C-63. The Online Harms Act had terrible provisions, even a provision where you could be placed under house arrest and required to wear an ankle bracelet without having been charged with any crime, without having been convicted of any crime. If your neighbor thinks that you might commit a hate speech crime, you could be hauled before a judge, and the judge could impose these restrictions on you, even when you haven't been charged with or convicted of any crime. That was in the Online Harms Act. So we might see more bad laws, but I would encourage people to contact their member of parliament, regardless of whether he or she is conservative or liberal, NDP, Green, Bloc, whatever. Contact your MP.
Does this give you pause when it's just the priorities seem, because the priorities for Canadians seems to be this jail not bail thing. We're seeing it from mayors writing letters. We're seeing it from like the provinces and that. And then, we've seen pressure from the Conservative Party. Yet they seem to put that one on the back burner, and they seem to put these ones up front. And these are the ones that they seem to want to accomplish before looking at something that's really troubling our society right now.
Well, Jim, they want to protect you. It's for your own good. They want to protect you from hate, and they want to protect you from misinformation, protect you from disinformation, and protect you from fraudsters and hackers on the internet.
Are you telling me this bill includes a ban of CBC?
Uh,
Oh,
CBC
you
is a
said
tax.
misinformation. You said misinformation, so I thought right away that that's the one that you wanted, that they should be protecting us from.
Did you see the smear job that CBC did on Charlie Kirk after he was assassinated?
I've
They
seen
called
so
him a,
many. I've seen
they
so many.
called him
Yeah.
they called him a fascist. They didn't say fascist. They said far right.
Yeah.
And so, for the CBC, if you are a classical liberal, which is very much non-fascist, or if you are a conservative, which is very much non-fascist,
Mm-hmm.
everybody who is not in their little bubble is far right. And so everybody's a fascist
Yeah.
except for the CBC. And it's just disgusting to see how our tax dollars are used to fund what I think is just an advocacy group
Yeah.
masquerading as a media outlet.
I'll give you an example. We do a news show every morning at 9 a.m. If anybody wants to check it out, every morning 9 a.m. weekdays. And for the last week, we've been pulling up the CBC website because the thing that should be the #1 headline in most news outlets is the budget. And because we have the PBO's office that's saying is shocking, stupefying, alarming, and unsustainable. It's the biggest deficit we're ever going to record. It's absolutely the #1 things we should be talking about. And then if you go to the CBC, we've done it every day, and it's not there. What's there is anti-Trump stuff, like just tons of anti-Trump stories. And what else is there? Is Taylor Swift, just nonsense to distract you from the real issue that's facing Canadians. The stuff that, when people can't afford their groceries, 89% of Canadians right now can't even, they're like $200 away from meeting their monthly obligations. Yet that's not there, right? What's there is anti-Trump and far right, they label all these people as far right. And we're going to talk about the trucker rally here at the end here. As that thing was happening and that fundraiser kicked off, Rosie Barton almost immediately said that was Russian money, which was proven wrong. But where did she get that information from? Did the CBC have this pipeline to Russia? Putin call her up, or what was the deal? But right away she said this is Russian money funding this. And then she said then it was Trump funding it and it's far right extremism. Turns out it was just a bunch of Canadians that were spending $50, $25, $250.
Well, the judge in her judgment reportedly recognized expressly what many of us have known to be true for the past 3.5 years, but there was no violence, there was no arson, there were no threats. And this is remarkable when you consider there were thousands and thousands of people in Ottawa over the course of 3 weeks, a little bit more people on the weekends, but even during the week. For that big of a protest, I'd be surprised if there was a bigger protest previously in Canadian history. I don't know. I haven't looked at it, but huge protest, thousands of people, goes on for weeks. Not a single shop window smashed in, not a single car set on fire, not a single policeman threatened. And so it's entirely peaceful. And yet the media narrative is that these are a bunch of hateful, criminal, violent, neo-Nazi white supremacists. And the media put that out to the politicians. The politicians put it out to the media, and they're in their own echo chamber back and forth. So the media say that the truckers are dangerous, violent extremists. And then the politicians say that. And then the media report on the politicians saying that. And around and around and around it goes. And in particular, there was an arson incident. There was somebody in Ottawa that tried to set a building on fire, and that person was caught. The media or the chief of police said, oh, that was one of the truckers. And boom, now you've got this news story out there that one of the truckers tried to set a building on fire. And this gets repeated by MPs, Jagmeet Singh and Liberal cabinet ministers, everybody's saying, oh yeah, the truckers tried to set a building on fire. And later on, it's exposed that the guy that tried to set the building on fire was upset with an ex-girlfriend or upset with an ex-roommate. He was caught. Fortunately, the building was not set on fire. But this is how the government-funded media and the politicians are just lying to each other, they're lying to the public, and it just goes back and forth, round and round.
Yeah, we were playing the video as you're talking there. We're showing it. And I remember we did some stories on it too. They were saying, Trudeau came out and said this is a small fringe group and racists and misogynists. And I can't remember all the ists that they used. And I always said, it doesn't explain the tens of thousands that line the ditches on the way to Ottawa. Do you know what I mean? You got a group that was in Ottawa, But there was tens of thousands of people that lined the ditches all the way. You can see that here, lined the ditches all the way as these truckers rolled into Ottawa there. And then it was the CBC actually that helped Ottawa parrot the message, but also doxing the truckers as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank goodness we had independent media like yourself, and we had, the Rebel and True North, or I think now it's called Juno, Counterpoint or Counter Signal. You had all of these groups, and there were lots of people too, individual people just doing their own cell phone feed. So it was actually beautiful in a way that the government-funded media were they don't have their position of dominance.
They embarrassed themselves. They embarrassed themselves and really let us know who they work for. And that wasn't journalism. Our job is to hold power accountable, not to parrot power, and definitely not to support power.
Yeah. So I was pleased today that neither Tamara Lich nor Chris Barber was locked up in jail. I was quite worried because the Crown was asking for 8 years jail time for Chris Barber, and whose legal representation is funded by the Justice Centre. And then they were asking for 7 years jail time for Tamara Lich, whose legal representation is funded by the Democracy Fund. And so people have donated to both organizations over the years. And it's they're placed under house arrest, which is unpleasant because other than work and medical appointments, certain narrow purposes, you can't just leave the house and connect over a coffee or a beer with a buddy. So they are both placed under house arrest. And but what bugs me is, so I'm glad they're not in jail. That's great, but there's a double standard at play. When there's Aboriginal protesters protesting against residential schools, they vandalized and tore down a statue of Queen Victoria at the legislature grounds in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in broad daylight, and police watched. And this is blatantly criminal conduct to destroy property. Not a single arrest was made. Crown prosecutors announced that nobody would be prosecuted. Again, for blatantly criminal conduct in broad daylight. But then conversely, Chris and Tamara are convicted of mischief. And I think it had everything to do with the unpopularity of the cause. They were protesting against vaccine mandates. Indirectly, they were protesting against lockdowns. And those were dimly viewed by the establishment as not the correct causes to protest. And so they were criminally charged and prosecuted. I think if they had been dark-skinned, gay Muslims protesting about climate change, they wouldn't have been prosecuted, even if their behavior had been exactly the same.
I would think that for the most part, it was that they were protesting the Liberal government. I think that was you know what I mean? And Justin Trudeau couldn't stomach that. And I think that, we've seen that through his demeanor. He just didn't like to be criticized. And even some of the stuff coming out from Catherine McKenna, like he gets really angry. And I think that was part of it. It was just, I don't know even if it's all that other stuff. It's just that they were criticizing the Liberal government. And it's no different back to the King days, when if you protested the King or did something, they would actually put a couple of heads on a stick and put them out at the front gate. And they used Tamara and Chris as the examples for any future protesters, including when people, again, that fundraiser, the GoFundMe that was across Canada, raised, I think, $10 million in a couple of days. And that was really seen as a threat to Canada, because they thought they could starve them out with money, right? They could say, well, they don't have the funding. And all of a sudden this $10 million showed up. That was a real threat, because all of a sudden they have the funds. So then the CBC fired up. Yeah, the CBC fired up their disinformation machine, and Rosemary Barton right away said, that's Russian money. And then, all these people, then they started doxing people in this. And then again, if you needed a head on a stick, they took that bakery in Victoria there and made a $250 donation, and they froze her bank account. And again, they ran that story. And again, that's a head on the stick to make sure that anybody that donated, here's your example, and this is what you get. And that is nothing other than that, right? Because they picked a single person out as an example. and basically put their head on a stick, and then the media parroted it out there to make sure everybody was aware if you donated that money that you better get it back, right? You know what I mean? You better be asking for it back, or your business is the next one to fall. And it's a sad day in Canada that the banks themselves allowed that to happen. That was one, you know what I mean, allowing that to happen. And then Mark Carney was actually one of the gave the advice to Chrystia Freeland to go ahead and freeze bank accounts. Sad day for Canada.
That put us back in terms of our international reputation. I mean, we are descending into being a banana republic with polar bears. I mean, we're cold and icy, but this is what you expect in a third world country. Some dictatorship where if you publicly criticize the president, then the next day, all of a sudden, you're facing criminal charges that everybody knows it's trumped up. Everybody knows it's because you criticized the president, but now you're locked up in jail, charged with assault or fraud or rape or something or other. And this is what we descended into, that where you do nothing illegal by donating to a peaceful protest, but the prime minister really dislikes the peaceful protest, and shame on the banks for not asking some tougher questions and not offering
CBC. Shame on CBC. Shame. They take $1.5 billion from the Canadian taxpayer. Who do they represent? They're sure not representing the taxpayer, are they?
No.
And then this is not a thing just subject to Canada, because it happened in the U.S. and I think the Democrats and Liberals kind of try the same thing. Because when Trump lost that election, they debanked that whole family. They debanked Eric and Donald and Donald Jr. and Melania. And you know what? The funny thing is Eric Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. will tell you that they had no choice. They closed all their bank accounts. They put it in Bitcoin. Turned out to be a big win for the Trumps, right? You know what I mean? Like, they had to move all their money into Bitcoin because that's the only place they would take it. And obviously, Bitcoin was around $10,000, and today I think it's 125,000 or something like that. So, but it's a real shame where CBC is supposed to act as the advocate for Canadians and hold power to account, and they let Canada down at that moment.
Well, there's a growing movement to defund them, which, as far as I can recall, did not exist 10 years ago. If it did exist, it was a lot smaller. You've got more and more people calling for the CBC to be defunded, and so that's a really positive development, because again, it either didn't exist or the voices were far fewer and far weaker a decade ago.
I grew up with CBC and I thought they were great. I was a big fan of the CBC, and I don't know if they should be completely defunded, but this adherence to the Liberal government, this basically, and it's been more than me saying it, it's actually from the government offices itself, that it's basically becoming a part of an arm of the Liberal government. And it's because we have one party, the Conservative Party, saying they want to defund them. And then you have the other party that's going to give them more funding. So obviously the CBC is a conflict of interest just in that itself. During an election, this should never happen. During an election, the Carney Liberals said they were going to give them more money, as almost like a bribe. And what did they do? They got the $150 million more money. Immediately after getting the money, the executive team gave themselves all a raise. It's almost like, job well done, boys, we won.
Yeah. But you know what? The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And I see more Canadians waking up. When I compare where this country is at right now, compared to 6 years ago, in 2019, almost everybody was asleep, not awake. And now there's, I think, a very large and growing, there's a large minority that is getting bigger of Canadians who are awake and alert and paying attention, who were people who were pre-2020, they were all asleep, but then with the lockdowns, vaccine mandates. So in some ways, we are in better shape because we are better able to resist tyranny than what we were in 2020.
Yeah, I think the small pockets that are getting louder, like yourself, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, Lisa, and like small outlets like ourselves, and that are starting to get bigger voices. They took away our bigger audience, and that we just work on different ways, and it's just And I'm going to go back to this, and I think Elon Musk may well have saved the Western world by buying X, because all those platforms were also censored. They were all censored, right, across the board. And look at the victories by Trump recently. He just got 25 million or 24 million from YouTube. You got money from Zuckerberg. You got money, and Zuckerberg came on and said we were forced to do it. You know what I mean? And YouTube, they're all saying we were forced to do it. And again, in the U.S., they have that First Amendment, which we don't have. And if there was anything that we could get in Canada, it would be really great to get that First Amendment.
Well, law follows politics, politics follows culture, culture follows education. So we are, to some extent, we're reaping the rewards of poor choices made over the course of decades, where we've relinquished education to, parents are not, in many cases, are not paying attention to what their children are learning or what they're not learning. History has been quietly and slowly removed from the school curriculum. When someone is ignorant of history, you can persuade them of anything. So we need to re-educate ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and if we get a culture of freedom and a culture whereby people expect the government to respect our human rights, that is going to trickle up into the courts, the judges, the lawyers, the politicians, and so on. So we just got to keep on going and fight for truth, justice, and freedom.
What should a person do about this bill that's coming up here?
C8, contact your member of parliament. Again, regardless of whether your MP is Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Green, Bloc, contact your member of parliament, urge him or her to vote against Bill C8, which is government control over the internet. And while you're at it, C2, C9, 289, if you can remember those numbers, bills, C2, C8, C9, they're all terrible attacks against our freedoms.
I think if you just go back to the last 10 years with a little whiteboard eraser and just take them all off the board, we might think, like Bill 669, Bill C48, and all these bills that are holding back Canada's prosperity as well. And now we've got a bunch of bills that are holding back our freedoms. And it just seems like, the Online News Act and a lot of these things have just basically, if you look at it, like it seems like a lot of these things weaken industry, like they weaken an industry and cripple it to the point where they got to ask for government handouts, and then the government gains more control over that industry or person, right? I mean, all these things seem to do is to weaken things and then make you stand there with a begging bowl asking for more porridge. Not that I like porridge anyway, but. I always thank you for your time. Good news I do have a question on Chris Barber's truck, because I know that thing was still, is that coming still, or have they made a decision on that truck, that big red? It's kind of like the flag bearer for that movement.
Okay, so the Justice Center is providing lawyers for Chris Barber on that issue as well. It's the same lawyer that's handling his criminal defense. So the next hearing on the government's efforts to confiscate that truck, to seize the truck, next hearing is November the 26th. And so we can expect a decision sometime after November 26th. So that could mean December, January, February. I think it bodes well with the no jail time sentence and with the judge acknowledging that Chris and Tamara were, cooperated with police. All the truckers did throughout the 3 weeks that they were in Ottawa. They were in daily communication with the police. They were parking their trucks where the police told them to park their trucks. So, hopefully, I don't want to make predictions, but hopefully Chris Barber can keep his truck, which he's had for so long, which he needs to earn his livelihood. But we won't know until December, January, February.
Yeah, it's odd that at the same time, Justin Trudeau was the leader of that party at the time. I mean, even his own MPs that were in cabinet are coming out and saying what a horrible person he was. Yet, like all these things, they were protesting basically his horrible policies. And yet they aren't given any leniency on that. And then why just that truck? And instead of like all, you know what I mean? Like it just seems to be targeted as well. Who knows, right? I guess it's just an example, right? So that, anyway, as usual, I thank you for your time. And it's always great talking to you. And again, you can write your MPs, make some noise. Be careful on the internet, I guess, right?
Well, no, just the opposite. Do not. Okay, the worst thing is self-censorship. Do not censor. Keep on speaking truth to power. Keep on going. We need to be bold and courageous and not self-censor. In the end, truth will always vanquish the lie. So it's just, we got to keep on going.
Starlink. I'm not sure if Elon will let them in there. Anyway.
Thanks for having me on your show, Jim.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for watching Now Media.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and like Captain Say.